Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. For once, the Timberwolves were the most composed team on the floor, and this was the Wolves' third straight win, beating Luka Doncic to the Dallas Mavericks behind a near triple-double from Anthony Edwards, as well as another strong performance from Naz Reid. I want to break down what was most impressive about the Timberwolves' defensive performance in this game, and also let's talk more Point Ant. He's been fantastic running the Wolves' offense. Let's break that all down here on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Tuesday, and it is a victory Tuesday. The Wolves have won 3 straight. This is the post-game podcast. We're talking all things Wolves Mavs here. First of all, though, off the top, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. It is absolutely greatly appreciated. This show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also download the new Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, Cken. All right, the Timberwolves are winners of 3 straight. They have won without Rudy Gobert all 3 games. No D'Angelo Russell on Friday. Obviously, no Karl-Anthony Towns, no Jordan McLaughlin, no Taurean Prince. And this was a basically full-strength Dallas Mavericks team. I mean, they're missing Dwight Powell, important rotation player for them, but Luka Doncic played after not playing on Saturday. Davis Bertans played. Like, this was basically the full-strength Mavs. Now, they came into the game with the same record as the Wolves, 15-15. They're now 3 after this loss. The Mavs are 3-11 on the road, and, of course, a game behind the Wolves in the standings. This is in some ways been just as probably more disappointing of a season for Dallas than it has been for Minnesota. Of course, getting as far as they did in the playoffs last year and then taking now a clear step back a third of the way through this season, but still a good win for Minnesota. And I want to get into what was most impressive about it. I think, though, my biggest takeaway to start is the Wolves defense on Luka Doncic in this game. Now, if you missed the game at all, or were kind of in and out or whatever, watching Monday Night Football, the cliff notes are the Wolves were down 9 at the end of the first quarter to Dallas, and Mavs were in the bonus early in the game. Luka made some tough shots. Then the Wolves completely flipped the script in the second quarter. They outscored Dallas 36-14 in the second quarter alone. And first it was the bench. It was Jalen Noel and Austin Rivers, who actually started in this game, but Rivers, Noel, those were the guys that kind of led this initial Wolves run, and then Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards closed out the first half, and the Wolves took a double-digit lead in halftime, and then really never looked back. This game wasn't as close as 10 points. But to me, the biggest story, and I should mention also part of the next line down in terms of cliff notes from the game, are that Luka Doncic and Jason Kidd both just completely lost it and were ejected at the same time, basically late in the game. I think it was late third quarter. And we'll talk a little about the officiating later, because I think it's kind of this was humorous from Dallas. But all that to say, Luka only played 28 minutes, I think, 28 minutes because of the ejection, but he was 5 of 17 from the floor. So yeah, he only scored 19 points. He's averaging 30 plus. He scored 30 plus in every game, but a handful this year. And so then the obvious rebuttal would be, well, he only played 28 minutes because he was ejected. Well, he was 5 of 17 to get his 19 points. 19 points on 17 shots isn't exactly ultra efficient. And really the only impressive plays he had all game were some really deep, difficult step back threes early in the game. I don't know this for sure, but I want to say he missed I'm pretty sure he missed 10 of his last 11 shots. I'd have to pull the actual the game log or the shot chart and go back and look at it. But he made 1 shot in the paint shortly before he got ejected. But other than that, Luka was not good offensively in this game. And credit the Timberwolves for their game plan. Credit Jaden McDaniels for some incredible individual defense. I want to start by talking about the Wolves team concept. They were playing high wall pick and roll coverage, which is what they did basically all of last year. With Rudy Gobert in the game, the Wolves almost always play drop coverage, meaning that Rudy gives ground, right, as the big protecting, guarding the screener. He's dropping, giving ground, protecting the paint, trying to cut off the drive, and the guard is trying to guard the action on the perimeter. And the Wolves used to get beaten this consistently. If you're not familiar with the concept, when Karl-Anthony Towns played drop, and they ran this a ton when Ryan Saunders was the head coach. It's really all they ran was drop coverage. Towns was not good in it. The Wolves struggle with it. They didn't have guards who could actually contain the point of attack. And Rudy Gobert is the league's best drop pick and roll center. He has been the last few years at least. And so the Wolves almost exclusively play drop coverage when Rudy's in the game. Now, last season, the Wolves played a ton of high wall, really kind of a blitzing scheme on the perimeter where Karl-Anthony Towns, or the bigs that were in the game, Jared Vanderbilt was great at this, would basically blitz the ball handler on the perimeter and just try and put pressure on the defense that way. And it worked for much of the season, right? The Wolves had a top 12 defense for much of the year. And eventually the good teams, the well-coached teams, the teams that knew how to control the ball, and also in the playoffs, were able to exploit that defense by simply being patient, making the right pass, passing out of double teams calmly and effectively, skip passes to the opposite corner, stuff like that, that good teams could do and exploit a high wall, really aggressive pick and roll defense. With no Rudy Gobert, the Wolves have been switching a lot. They've also been playing more high wall. And Naz Reid's not a very good drop big at all. I would venture to say he's worse than Karl-Anthony Towns. So Finch is having them play high wall with Naz Reid in the game. Naz only played 12 minutes on Sunday. He got hurt. Thankfully played and actually led the Wolves in minutes in this game, played 40 minutes and was really, really good. We'll talk more about him offensively later. But defensively, I was very impressed with Naz Reid. He played high wall coverage pretty expertly. The Wolves were able to contain most of what Luka was trying to do with the ball in his hands. I mean, he only shot 11 two-pointers in this game. 8 of his 17 shot attempts were tough threes. Like, really, he was never open for these three-point attempts. The 3 that he made were all difficult shots. They forced him into 4 turnovers, and Luka only attempted 7 free throws, which, like, isn't too bad. I mean, he shot the ball 17 times. He's got a monster free throw rate. The guy gets the line all the time. He whines incessantly. He's always, that's his game, right? There's a lot of James Harden there. And the Wolves did a good job. I mean, the pick and roll coverage, that scheme was really good. The only lapses were like Spencer Dinwiddie got off a bunch of open shots, was 5 of 10 from 3. He's really the only one that hurt them consistently until late. Basically garbage time. Davis Bertans kind of went nuts. But other than that, this was really just Dinwiddie was the only guy that they were kind of letting get loose. And they were fortunate to build a lead because that was the worst thing, right? And I guess that means they had a pretty good night defensively. Jaden McDaniels was outstanding one-on-one against Luka Doncic. In the pick and roll game, Jaden McDaniels stayed glued to Luka for the most part. Ant did a good job too when he was matched up with him. It was Ant that kind of rode the play when Luka got really incensed at the officials and ultimately was ejected right afterwards. Ant or I guess it was Jaden McDaniels that was playing physical defense on him. Luka stopped, pivoted, tried to shoot a tough mid-range jumper, and McDaniels avoided committing the foul. It was borderline. I probably would have called it a foul on the floor, not on the shot. It was close. Luka leaned into Jaden. Jaden was mostly straight up and down, but kind of slid into his space. Didn't get the call. That play was a good example of the Wolves were physical with him initially on the perimeter, and then physical with him when he contested the shot, stayed straight up and down, made his life more difficult. And that was kind of the story of how they defended Luka Doncic. It was length with Jaden McDaniels. It was physicality. Jaden was as physical as I can remember seeing him defensively. Well, not committed a ton of fouls. He only committed 3 personal fouls in this game, which is, not normal for Jaden McDaniels, right? Only committed 3 personal fouls, was able to play 37 minutes, and was really impressive overall defensively against Luka Doncic. So a strong performance from McDaniels, a strong performance from the Timberwolves defensively as a whole, in holding Doncic in check. And that to me was the biggest takeaway from this game. All right, next I want to talk about a few more key takeaways from this game. I have to talk some Naz Reid. We got to talk Jalen Noel. We got to talk Point Ant. There's so much to get to still. We'll do individual studs and duds here as well. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life as well. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Now make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's Take of the Day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so much more to get to from this game. Let's talk about, this leads into the Ant conversation, but let's talk about that adversity that I mentioned a little bit ago. Things really off the top of the show. The Wolves were down 30-21 after the first quarter. The Mavs were in the bonus early in the first. They closed the first quarter by getting a bunch of free throws, a couple of silly Luka Garza falls, a couple fouls, a couple of questionable calls by the officials. And things were a little sloppy for the Wolves, but then Jalen Noel comes in the game. Wendell Moore Jr. plays some significant minutes, solid minutes at the first part of the second quarter. Austin Rivers was big also. And then Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels really took control of this game in the second. We saw Jaden actually play a strong role offensively in this game, in addition to playing such good defense on Luka. The Wolves used a 21-5 run to close the second quarter and ultimately outscored the Mavs by 22 in the second frame, 36-14. And Ant, for his part, I thought he did a really good job maintaining his composure. Yes, he complained a lot in this game, but it pales in comparison to the Mavericks, first of all. Second of all, he maintained his composure enough to still be effective offensively. He channeled that. Like the second quarter, I thought was the best example. And yes, he complained throughout the game, all four quarters, because that's what Ant does to an extent. That's what basically everyone does in the NBA, right? But in the second quarter specifically, I thought Ant really channeled that and used it to his advantage. He was really good defensively. You could tell him just kind of like lock in when he was matched up with Luka and like, okay, I'm ready to go now. Offensively, he picked his spots. He took a couple of long threes, but like they were in rhythm. I didn't really have an issue with it. Overall, he only shot 7-21 from the field in this game. So not an outstanding shooting night for Ant, but I thought he had control. It was almost like a mix in my mind of Friday's win in Oklahoma City and Sunday's win over the Bulls, where Sunday it was like a masterful performance, really, by Ant. And Oklahoma City, the game against OKC last Friday, was also a really good game for Ant, but it started off pretty uneven, and then it closed really strong. And the defense was miserable from him early in that game on Friday, but he was awesome down the stretch. And Sunday was like great throughout. I thought the results were a little bit like he almost had a triple-double. The shooting percentage wasn't great, but he got to the line a lot. But the process was also really good, right? So I thought this was a well-rounded Ant game. He handled the adversity of not getting calls well. He mostly maintained his composure. He only shot 33% from the field, but he did get to the line 11 times in this game. He was 3 of 6 on threes. I thought he picked his spots well there and had 9 assists to only 1 turnover in this game. That was the thing with the OKC game, was the unevenness, the turnovers, a little less of that in Sunday's game against the Bulls. And then today against the Mavs, or Monday against the Mavs, a lot of that was kind of eradicated. I thought he played extremely well offensively. Let's talk about Naz Reid. Naz, fantastic game. He played 12 minutes on Monday, scored the Wolves' first 10, Sunday, scored the Wolves' first 10 points against Chicago, and then got hurt. Like, he didn't come back in the second half of that game, so it was we were uncertain if he was going to play Monday, but he plays 40 minutes, leads the team 27-13, 11 of 19 shooting, 2 of 6 from outside the arc, 3 of 4 at the line, 2 steals, a block, an assist, a plus 17 in the plus minus column. Just a fantastic Naz Reid game. And I talked about his defense already, so I don't want to harp on that too much, but he did a great job defensively, and I thought that was huge for this team. Jalen Noel, we'll talk more about him in studs and duds, but a good performance from him off the bench. As a team, as a whole, I thought that, first of all, the bench played well. It was mostly Jalen Noel, but like Wendell Moore Jr. only played 5 minutes. I thought it was a strong stint. Nate Knight was a little quieter in this game, certainly, but I thought he was good. Bryn Forbes played some solid minutes. Finch leaned heavily on the starters in this game. Now, of course, two of the 5 starters were regular bench rotation guys in Naz Reid and Austin Rivers, but they both played extremely well. And actually, let's do that. Let me focus a little bit more on Austin Rivers because he's not going to be able to crack studs and duds because the Wolves had some guys pretty amazing games, and I don't want to shortchange Austin. Rivers was awesome in this game, and I spent a decent amount of time, maybe a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I think it might have been a post game pod, just kind of really lambasting Rivers and how he'd been performing. I thought he'd been frankly miserable. He's been really good over this 3-game winning streak. In this game, 16 points on 7 shots, 3 of 4 outside the arc, 6 of 7 shooting from the floor, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, only 1 turnover for Rivers. He was competing defensively again, active, running the floor hard, picking his spots in the half court, I thought, very well. A couple of tough shots that he made. He had a nice baseline floater in the fourth quarter, was shooting the ball when he was open in the corners. There were a couple of times where Ant should have gotten the ball in the corner and didn't, and he was wide open. This 3-game run that Austin Rivers is on, pretty incredible. For being a guy that wasn't in the rotation, was barely in the rotation the last several weeks. Friday in Oklahoma City, 20 points, 5 steals, 4 made threes. Sunday against the Bulls, 14 points, 4 made threes. Monday against Dallas, 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 made threes, 6 of 7 from the floor. So the last 3 games combined, Austin Rivers is shooting 17 of 21, which is absurd from the field overall. He's shooting 11 of 15 from 3-point range, also absurd. 5 of 6 from the free throw line. Over these 3 games, he's had a combined 12 rebounds, 4 assists, 6 steals, and only 4 turnovers. And they were, I think, all travels in the Oklahoma City game, by the way. 3 of the 4 turnovers were travels in the Oklahoma City game. He scored 20 points against OKC, 14 against the Bulls, and 16 against the Mavs. A fantastic 3-game run for Austin Rivers. So good on him for putting his money where his mouth is. I mean, he'd been talking a lot in the media about how this team is a good team. Him and Taurean Prince were kind of taking that lead as like the vets who are talking as they should and saying like, hey, we've been on good teams. This is a good team. We'll get there. And he was right. And now he's a big part of it and likely will be at least on the fringes of the rotation as the Wolves start to get guys back. He is best cast as an off-ball guy who can be a secondary kind of perimeter defender and a spot up type shooter. Not a sharpshooter by any means, but he has been the last 3 games. And if he could be around that career average of 34, 35, 35.5%, I mean, there's a role for that player. He's a more well-rounded player, certainly than Britton Forbes, and it would make more sense for him to get those short minutes once the Wolves are healthy than it would Forbes, I think. But overall, fantastic game for Rivers, fantastic 3-game run. And, that's great to see. A couple real quick things. Dallas came into this game 9th in defensive rebounding percentage, according to Basketball Reference, a top 10 defensive rebounding team. The Wolves, of course, are 21st in offensive rebounding, which is down a lot from last year. But the Wolves did manage 9 offensive rebounds in this game against Dallas. And on the flip side, Dallas is a bad offensive rebounding team. They're actually dead last in offensive rebound percentage. But the Wolves still, the Wolves have been beaten on the offensive glass by teams that don't make it a point to do that sort of thing anyway. The Wolves still were a +2 on the glass in this game, which was good to see. And obviously that will need to continue against Dallas on Wednesday. The last thing here is that the Wolves won the points of the paint battle 58-18. This wasn't an old school, Towns didn't play. This wasn't just a back to the basket, post up, throw it in, score in the paint type of a game. This was mostly straight line drives, beating the Mavericks perimeter defense, a lot like what the Wolves did to the Bulls on Sunday. Move the ball side to side, attack, get to the cup, get fouled, make a bucket. Mostly Anthony Edwards, a lot of Naz Reid. Jalen Noel was good. Also, we'll talk more about him in a minute, but all those guys did a great job putting the ball on the floor, getting to the rim, and making life difficult on the Mavs. Very quickly related to the officiating, I don't know what happened to Jason Kidd and Luka Doncic. I think it felt like a season-long, frustration. I know we're 31 games in for them, but hey, people thought they'd be a lot better than 15 and 16 through 31 games. And they just lost it. The Mavs shot 7 more free throws than the Wolves in this game. I don't know what Luka said. It certainly looked like Rodney Mott should not have ejected him as quickly as he did. It looked kind of, Luka whines a lot. It drives me crazy, but that was a pretty quick hook from Rodney Mott. And the Jason Kidd should have actually gotten ejected faster. He was all the way across the court, not during a timeout. It was a dead ball, but he was on the court, mid-court before he got the first technical, and like on the other side near the baseline where the fans are sitting, or the sideline where the fans are sitting, the opposite corner of the floor, before he was ejected. So that was weird. But the Mavs actually shot 7 more free throws than the Wolves. The Wolves were called for 1 more foul than Dallas was. This was just a bad Dallas Mavericks performance more than it was the fault of the officiating. Now, I didn't love the officiating because they were calling a ton of fouls. But then again, you have Luka Doncic and Anthony Edwards, 2 guys who are, that's the style of, bully ball that they play. They're trying to get those calls. Makes it challenging on the officials. Generally, I thought they did okay. It was, a little whistle happy for my liking. But at any rate, that was a weird flex for the Mavs to fall apart in the way that they did in the second half of this one. And I feel like I can speak on this because we've been watching the Timberwolves all year. The team that has the most technical fouls in the league is the Timberwolves, and the Wolves, up until this weekend, maybe have been the most disappointing team in the league relative to expectations. So I feel like I'm qualified to speak about the way a team falls apart and conducts themselves in a situation like this. And Dallas wasn't great here. All right, let's close with individual studs and duds. We're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Lockdown Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season, which is now underway, to basketball and the World Cup, which of course just ended. They've got it all at betonline.net. They've got all the sports, obviously NHL. I mentioned college, but college sports in general, college basketball, pro football, Monday night, good game on Monday night during the Wolves game. So make sure to head over there, check out what they've got for this, the next part of the Timberwolves, the next part of the NBA season as well. Futures, a ton of fun. If you love sports podcasts as well, you can also find those at BetOnline. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close this thing out. Put a bow on it with studs and duds. Number 1 for me, stud in this game. We usually do 3 studs, 1 dud. Number 1 has to be Anthony Edwards. I know he only shot 33% from the floor, but this was a well-rounded and mostly well-composed Anthony Edwards game. 27, 13, and 9, plus 2 blocks and a steal. Just 1 single turnover. I know technically he didn't start at point guard. D'Angelo Russell is a point guard. Austin Rivers started at the 2 guard. But Anthony Edwards was the initiator of offense almost as much as he was Sunday against the Bulls. Bringing the ball up the court, getting the Wolves into sets, dealing with these double teams at the top of the key like Luka typically does. And Ant was really good. I thought he was good defensively. He was physical defensively. Active hands, went for a couple of strips, got called for fouls that were questionable. I think at least 2 of his 3 fouls were actually probably not fouls, as weird as that is, for as much as Ant complains. I think he had a point on at least those 2 that I can remember. But a very well-rounded Ant game. And it's been talked about a bunch, but the ratio of smiles to dunk attempts to, just high effort plays from Ant, it's all connected, and we're seeing it right now. And here's hoping it continues. I mean, he was fantastic in this game. Second stud for me is Naz Reid, 27 points, 13 rebounds, 2 steals, an assist, and a block. He shot 11 of 19 from the floor, 2 of 6 outside the arc, 3 of 4 at the line. My biggest gripe about Naz for the last 2+ years has been his lack of rebounding ability. I mean, you're talking about a guy who primarily played backup center for this team. And I thought he was a main culprit when it came to the Wolves struggling on the defensive glass, dating back a couple of seasons now. He's been much better this year. And he's played a little bit more at the 4, but his rebound rate, we're sitting here right now coming into this game. So before this game against Dallas, when he gets 13 boards, he actually has a higher defensive rebound rate than Karl-Anthony Towns, a higher overall rebound rate than Karl-Anthony Towns. The only Timberwolves player with a higher rebound rate, taking out Luka Garza and hit, the 6 games he's played in, is Rudy Gobert. Naz Reid has been a good defensive rebounder, a good overall rebounder for the Wolves this year. Again, not what we've typically seen from him. We saw that in this game too, against a good defensive rebounding team in the Dallas Mavs. Naz had a couple offensive boards himself. Again, 27 and 13, a good performance from him. I'm going to cheat. The second straight game, I did this after Sunday's game. I'm going to go 4 studs for this game. because Jaden McDaniels has to get one. Jaylen Nowell has to get one. Jaden first, 13 points on 5 of 11, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. Those numbers don't really pop, not as much as maybe they did Sunday against the Bulls. But defensively, the defensive effort pops. It pops off the film. If you go back and watch this game, he was really good against Luka. We talked about this first segment. Really good in pick and roll coverage, really good in isolation, physical without fouling, straight up and down more often than not. Stuff that we don't typically see Jaden do. And hopefully this is a sign of things he's learned, a sign of things to come, and not just a blip on the radar. But if he's finally learning to defend without fouling, and you could defend Luka Doncic for 28 minutes essentially, and commit only 3 fouls, stay on the floor, play 37 minutes yourself, and contribute 13 points offensively and 5 boards. I mean, like, that's great. The Wolves, I said after Sunday's game that we'll take this Jaden McDaniels night in, night out. I'll take Monday's Jaden McDaniels too. This was a great performance from him. Jaylen Nowell, 18 points on 10 shots off the bench, 6 of 10 shooting, 2 of 3 on threes, 4 of 5 at the line, got to the line 5 times in 25 minutes, was a plus 18, had the second best plus minus on the Timberwolves in this game, which that doesn't typically happen for Jaylen. But a really good game off the bench for him. Only had 2 rebounds and a steal, but only turned it over once. And a great game from Jaylen Nowell. Was a ton of fun to watch him play in this game. And you know, like, played within himself, which we don't always see Jaylen Nowell do. Duds, I struggle with it in this game because there were so many guys that played such heavy minutes and a lot of guys that barely played. D'Angelo Russell wasn't great. I don't want to give him a dud because I thought he was okay. I thought he ran offense okay when he had the chance. He did have 5 assists, 3 turnovers, shot 4 of 13 from the field, including just 1 of 6 outside the arc, 9 points, and was a -9 in 35 minutes in a game the Wolves won by 10. So not great. If I had to name one, I'd name D'Lo, but he's played so well lately. I hate to do that. It was fine. Like, the Wolves could afford that in this particular game against Dallas. Anyway, the Wolves will take on Dallas again Wednesday for this weird, like, double, 2 games in a row against the same team in the same arena. So hopefully the Mavs will stay whatever they were on Monday. And hopefully the Wolves potentially get back Rudy. Who knows? Who else maybe could be back Wednesday. So we'll, of course, do the live postcast with Marnie Gellner, Bally Sports North, over at the Locked On Minnesota YouTube channel, 45 minutes after the game live. And then we'll also post that on Locked On Wolves, all the audio feeds. It's the episode before this. If you're listening on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you listen, you can find the postcast as the episode right before this one you're listening to now. We'll do that again Wednesday. A big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. And a reminder, you can watch us anywhere, or watch us on YouTube, listen to us anywhere. You can also download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your local experts on all the biggest stories. And one last reminder that you can make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today podcast, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.